started now. All right, my name is Nicole Carter. I'm a part of the digital curriculum crew. And if you have any questions regarding Flipped Classroom, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm on all of the social medias, but then also obviously I'm a part of your school district. So just feel free to email me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I did Flipped Classroom for a long time when I was still in the classroom before becoming a TOSA. And I'll kind of tell you my journey as we get started today. But I started noticing, as I'm sure you did, as we've heard from some of our administrators, that the term flipped classroom was being bandied about quite often, and I felt like we needed to address it. That was, of course, back when we were still thinking we were going to be doing the hybrid model, so I'll address that as well, how that's different, since we now know we're doing comprehensive distance learning. So just make sure that if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. We'll also collate and put together the Google Doc. This is being recorded, so you can come back and watch it at any time. And this is supposed to be kind of, I think, the preface before we get into talking about how to make your own videos. I've got a 3-part series that we'll be doing over the next 3 weeks on how to start you off basics and then moving into intermediate and advanced video making. So just to kind of give you the background on what we're doing today, this is mostly about engaging and teaching. Obviously, flipped classroom model and making your own videos is about giving direct instruction to the students. But the fact that you're using your own content, your own face and voice, then it becomes about engaging students and letting them know you and your personality. So the engagement piece does come into play. As always, we need to think about that equity lens as being a part of what we are doing and making things accessible. I'm going to be talking about how I definitely found that flipped classroom modalities and teaching actually helped with making the learning accessible for all. It's a huge part of what we do, but I think it also led me into the path of providing more student choice and really amplifying student identity. So I know that it might be a jump to get there, but I'll try and remember to address it. And if I don't, Kristen and Carrie will definitely remind me as we keep going. But there was definitely an evolution in my journey, and flipped classroom was a huge part of that to help me identify and be more efficient in the classroom and really think about my face-to-face time and my conferencing time with my students to make it as valuable as possible. So in terms of my own flipped classroom journey, where I started and what I'm doing here and why I feel like I have the ability to speak to you guys about it. I was starting flipped classroom actually 7 years ago in the classroom because our school decided it was going to become a STEM school. I remember sitting with my department. I was a middle school English teacher, and my boss came in and said, "We're going STEM. You've got to figure it out, and you might have to lose some of your curriculum to help support it." I usually am a pretty verbose person, but in that meeting, I kind of shut down because no teacher likes to hear that they've got to get rid of some of their content, right? So I was trying to figure out how to make it work. And I had been studying a lot on the flipped classroom model. The idea that I could dive deeper into the concept also kind of made me think, well, maybe I can have more time in the classroom for the science, STEM stuff, you know? So I started thinking about my standards. We were already kind of standards grading at that point. And I started backwards planning. And I noticed that I could go deeper and I had more time to access other things in the classroom. The second year, or at the end of that year, I started being more intentional of building my online coursework because the kids had to access the videos somehow. Now keep in mind, this was like 7 years ago. So we were definitely not facing the constraints that we're facing now. But at the same time, I knew that they needed a central location to find the videos. At first, I was putting them up on YouTube and using a lot of the data and analytics that YouTube was giving me to know how often my students were accessing the video, how long they were sticking with the video, that sort of thing. But at the time, I started to get more people than just my students watching the videos. So the YouTube analytics and data that I was getting stopped helping at that point, and I needed something else. And so that's when I started turning towards building intentionally online. As I went into year 2, I started noticing that I needed to change my videos. They were too long. And because they felt more comfortable to me, I was starting to get into video editing and making the videos maybe more professional and polished looking. And all of the data we now know shows that students need our videos to be a lot shorter. And so when I recorded the videos my second year, I was able to cut many of my videos time in half. I was more concise with the content. And then I started working on providing more feedback to students because my face-to-face time was drastically rescheduled because I wasn't just lecturing anymore. And then the last year before becoming a TOSA, I started working on building self-paced modules for my students. At that point, any student could be on any one part of the curriculum, and I was zeroing in and doing conferencing all the time with my students and doing one-on-one intervention and small group intervention. At the time, I didn't realize I was doing workshop model because I was in a different school district and we just quite frankly didn't have access to that information. But that's definitely where I ended up because I was doing flipped classroom. So all of that is to say is because that journey happened prior to COVID. So as we start talking about what is the flipped classroom, the original concept of flipped classroom is all about taking direct synchronous instruction, lecture-based instruction, and putting it into a video recording for students. So it's now asynchronous. They can access it at any time. You can use it as a reteaching tool. They can speed it up or slow it down or rewatch certain sections. If you already are a person that uses slide decks in the classroom, you already are lecture-based, that's predominantly going to be our upper grade people, right? You might already have a whole bunch of slide decks ready to go. So it becomes very easy to do what's called a screencast, where you just are talking over the top of your slide decks and recording the screen in front of you. So it's easy to do that. If you have a teacher iPad, you could also use some of the free or cheaper whiteboard apps on your iPad and do an annotation kind of Khan Academy like video using your teacher iPad. And then also to make them even shorter than that, because we know that that's good for students, you can really easily make videos just straight in Seesaw and Canvas. We're going to be addressing that in the Make Your Own Videos series that I talked about earlier. So again, starting basic, then building on those skills and going into intermediate, and then finally going into the more advanced. And in fact, we have 2 videos on advanced features. So if you're a person sitting there going, I need more, we've got 2 advanced ones. The secondary advanced one is not a part of the series, but it goes into using green screen and picture-in-a-picture within iMovie. You have iMovie on your teacher MacBooks, so it's actually a really robust movie editing program, and I would say that's definitely more advanced. Okay, now how is it different from being in person versus comprehensive distance learning? Well, I think any flipped classroom model, you have to know your targets, and then from your targets, you backwards plan. You need to know what it is your kids have to know in order to be successful in the classroom, and that's what your videos become. So anytime you can give direct instruction, any kind you're doing, thinking in terms of our reading and writing materials, because that's what I know so much, but like your mini lessons, those sorts of things can definitely be turned into flipped classroom videos. If you have a specific idea in math that you need to walk through the formula, you can put that into a video. I think sometimes when we're using things like Go Formative, you get a lot more engagement with the students when you're doing that live through Zoom, for example, but as a reteaching tool, if you need to go back over a concept taught, definitely a video helps in that time. In regular, normal, non-COVID experience, your face-to-face time in class becomes incredibly valuable, and you have to completely restructure how you normally would do that, especially in the secondary. I think secondary has a lot we can learn from how elementary structures and does workshops or stations and station rotations. We just don't do that often in secondary, and we definitely can once we start using some of these flipped classroom models. But the other thing too, you definitely have to think about how the students are going to interact with the videos and what you are specifically asking them to do. And I went through a lot of iterations over the years in my classroom trying to figure out exactly what worked. For my honors tag SUMA students, they were totally fine with creating, watching the video and taking their own notes. For my regular students, guided notes helped. I also made my videos interactive, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and they loved that, and I got great data, formative data off of making the videos interactive. But you have to go through the process of teaching the students. Now, how does it differ with comprehensive distance learning? Well, obviously, our face-to-face time is not happening yet, right? We're not going back on campus yet. But we do think that there will be some synchronous instruction happening through Zoom. So how are we using that time frame? Are we going whole class? Are we going small group? How are we getting our data collected? And believe me, when we start to switch into these online platforms, there's so much that we can mine out of the information to help us make those decisions on whether we're doing one-on-one or we're going small group. Especially with CDL, we have priority targets that will be identified by both TOSAs and teachers in the district to help us kind of narrow our focus and figure out where we need to go. That direct instruction is still made into a video if at all possible, but I've also been told recently, I got an email this morning, that we will be doing synchronous instruction through Zoom that you will then record and make available for students that maybe couldn't attend at that specific time. Now that pulls up a whole lot of logistical questions when we think about our littles and recording, if they've got their cameras on, and we're working through that, what the workflow will be with IT, but that is what we're hearing. So your lectures might not even need to be a full planned out slide deck. For example, it could just be recording your Zoom interactions with the class. I will say that you start to think about too, if you're building using something like Canvas, when I say self-pacing, that means I'm using like the modules in Canvas to start getting the kids to move through content linearly. I want them to read this article, watch this video, and then answer these questions. And as I build that out in a module on Canvas, that's very easy for them to navigate and go at their own pace. Again, using that data to help us identify who we're meeting with, and again, how do the students interact. One thing that I noticed when I very first started with Flipped Classroom, my very first video was around this time in August, sitting at my kitchen table. I had told my daughter and my husband, get out of here because I can't have background noise happening while I'm recording the video. And I think it was like 3 hours later that I still hadn't finished the video. I remembered, again, I was by myself, but I remembered having a pep talk out loud with myself. Figure it out. Get it going, Carter. You've got to do it in this next step, because if you can't get it done, you can't spend hours and hours and hours like this making videos. It's not feasible. You won't be able to maintain it. So don't think you have to have a script. Don't think it has to be perfect. If you were in our course earlier this morning, we were talking about humanizing the experience. Your students want to get to know you. So if your dog runs in and makes loud noise, acknowledge it. Don't think you have to stop and re-record. Like say, hey, my dog just came into the room. My dog's name is Stuart. You want to see him? And then hold him up to the camera or something. You don't have to make it exactly perfect, and point out those flaws to kind of, again, humanize what you're going through. The planning part and creating of the content, as we know, is what takes the most time. And that's the same here for creating videos as well. So usually creating and planning, I got this off of a Cult of Pedagogy podcast and blog post that just came out at the end of the spring this last year. I actually think you spend more time planning and creating the content than you do actually recording. But this came off of their website, so I wanted to make sure to share that with you. I don't think that when you very first start, you need to spend a lot of time and energy into thinking about editing and creating a final finished published piece that looks beautiful and is YouTube ready. That might come later as you become more comfortable with what you're doing, but it's not necessary at the beginning. So recording takes as long as it takes to get through the content, and I would hopefully advise you that the content and what you're building needs to be less than 10 minutes, full period, full stop. So they say when we talk about flipped classroom model that it should be 1.5 minutes per grade level, but I think in general, less than 10 minutes. Your students are like super savvy consumers of short video content. With the rise of TikTok, they're watching videos that are 60 seconds or less and getting a lot of content out of it. So we have to make sure that we like keep their attention, and then based on that, I think the actual data says keep it to 6 to 7 minutes, because after minute marker 9, they start to tune out, you lose interest. So I'm just saying, I know sometimes that's really hard with concepts to get them under that time frame. So if you do have like a lecture that you normally would do in 40 minutes, then you're maybe looking at that becoming a part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 series. I know that we had a middle school teacher at Conestoga that referenced she was making a 2-part video series, and she was watching her analytics. She was watching the data. She would have high engagement for video 1, and then video 2 would drop off significantly. So she just stopped doing video 2 and tried to get everything into a 10-minute or less video. So keep that in mind. Short videos is better for our students to be able to engage and retain that content. And the same thing that goes when we always talk about creating presentations that, you know, you don't want to kill your audience with text heavy presentation slides. The same goes for when you're making video content and when you're actually making content online. As I said earlier today, designing your information for people to actually consume means less text heavy, and really think about your visuals. I'm seeing some questions coming in about Loom, and I just want to address that really quickly. So we have been told that Loom will no longer be allowed because they did not sign our student data privacy agreement, and then we're asking for too much information going into our Google accounts. So I'll be talking about our kind of workarounds from using Loom. You definitely, I would recommend for sure that you've got access to Zoom and you're pretty comfortable with it, and Zoom will allow you to screen share and record your face just like Loom would. So Zoom might be the easiest way for you to do that. And then the 2 other ones that we would recommend at this point would be Screencast-O-Matic and Screencastify. Those would be the 2 alternatives or 3 alternatives to Zoom or Loom. They all sound the same. Additionally, you on your teacher devices have access to QuickTime. When I first started, I was using Screencast-O-Matic, and then I started defaulting to QuickTime and then editing in iMovie. And both QuickTime and iMovie are free on your teacher MacBooks. So that would be what I would ultimately recommend once you feel more comfortable. You can, I'm seeing someone ask, can't you record in Canvas? You can record in Canvas, but you're limited to about 5 minutes. So just keep that in mind. Both Seesaw and Canvas, I think, eventually will limit how long your video recordings are. Anything I need to stop and refer to, Carrie or Kristen?
I just wanted to throw in, I mentioned it in the chat, but Seesaw has new updates, and you can now record 20 pages worth of 5-minute recordings. Not that you would necessarily ever want to do that, but you can go beyond the 5-minute limit now.
Thank you for reminding me. I forgot. You told me that last week and I forgot. I was going through Instagram a few days ago. My team can tell me because I know I shared this with them. This popped up on my Instagram a few days ago, and I thought, wow, what an amazing use of video instruction. So I'm going to share it with you. It's only 46 seconds, but if you, again, were with us earlier today, we were talking about that humanizing experience. So this is a great example of humanizing, welcoming students, but then also pretty advanced video techniques because she's obviously using green screen here. But I just wanted to share this with you real quick.
Oh, do you need help? Wait a minute. You look like you're in the 5th grade. Are you in the 5th grade? Great. Well, my name is Ms. Smith, and welcome to World Travelers. Oh, you want to know where we're going this year? Of course I'll tell you. We're going to Africa. We're going to Mexico. My favorite, Germany. And did I not mention we're also time traveling? Oh yes, honey, time traveling. We're going to the Wild Wild West. We're going to the Civil Rights Movement, the Great Depression, the Roaring 20s, ooh, my favorite. And not to mention all of the world wars. So you might want to get ready, even at your house, for this great adventure. Oh, and don't forget, let me get that passport.
Okay, so I mean, she makes me smile every single time. So she's using a green screen, she's editing in iMovie. There's a lot of things we can break down here. Obviously, she's using a lot of background images as well. So this is a great way to kind of, I think, invite students into your content. And again, power of video instruction. Okay, so a couple of other things for us to think in terms of just the actual teaching components of flipped classroom. So one thing that I think is really important when we talk about the accessibility that videos can bring to your classroom, if you do it the right way, you have to teach your students how to watch a video. I know that sounds really weird, but in reality, our students are used to just passively consuming, and they are not they haven't officially been taught how to watch something in an academic way. So we need to kind of work those skills in. We need them to understand that they can use the pause button, right? Like if you don't understand a concept or you're writing notes and it's going too fast, please pause the video. So I always used to call it the power of the pause button, and my students would know that. And I would say that as I was recording too. Reminder students, if this is going too fast, please use the power of the pause button and stop the video. Remember that they also need to know how they can rewind, rewatch the video, or even speed up or slow down. If we are, and our recommendation is definitely going to be to ask that you guys put any videos that you create up on your BSD YouTube channel. I know that sounds kind of scary. It's not. You can make all of your videos unlisted. Every single one of us has attached to our Google account a free YouTube channel. Once you go in to set up the YouTube channel, it does take, I think, 24 hours to activate. So you might want to go in and just open up YouTube and say, I want to create my channel. It's pretty easy. You just click a button and say start. And we'll probably go over that actually as I think about it in my video series that starts tomorrow. But once you do that, the students within the YouTube gear can speed up and go 1.5 times speed, 2 times speed, but they can also slow it down. So thinking about some of our language learners that might need us to slow it down. They might need some accommodations that allow them to listen to things at different speeds. So going into YouTube gives us that ability. I think you have the ability in Google Drive too, but we run into issues with Google Drive. So we're just saying across the board, upload to YouTube, make it unlisted, and then share that link from YouTube to your students. But students at that point can speed up and slow down the content as well, which is super helpful. And then the other thing that's really helpful and is a part of accessibility, but it just turned out I noticed that it helped with all of my students. I was reading a book about inclusive classrooms, and they mentioned trigger icons. And so the trigger icon I always used in my flipped classroom videos when I wanted my kids to pause and take notes with what was on the screen was the use of a pencil icon. As soon as they saw that pencil icon, they knew they needed to pause and take notes. I had a student teacher one year that wanted to do a video. She found someone else's video and had the kids watch that. But because it was someone else's video, my trigger icons weren't there. And as a result, the students came back the next day and said, the icon wasn't there. I didn't know when to take notes. So it can help, but it also can kind of hinder if you're using someone else's videos. But it was at that moment that I really realized that they were zeroing in on that and making use of it. And I would remind them at the beginning of all of my videos, don't forget power of the pause. Don't forget when you see that pencil icon, pause and take notes. Again, taking notes is a thing that they have to learn as well, right? Because most of the time they would start with taking notes and doing everything that they saw on the screen. So we had to work on just straight up note-taking skills as well. So the other thing I would use in the classroom is something called the whisk. So this was my specific way that I had the kids watch the videos. They watched the video, they took notes. At the end of the video, they always had to summarize the content in a paragraph. Now, depending on what grade level you're at, you can tell them how big and long to make that paragraph. And occasionally I would have to come back and reteach them, right? Because eventually they would start to, instead of doing 3 to 5 sentences, which is what I would ask for the summary, I would start to get this video was about, and then they would insert the title of the video and say that that was their summary. So once I started to see that start to happen, we'd have to go back and reteach the summary part. And then the last one was ask a question about the content. Now that was super helpful for me to start to identify maybe what I wasn't doing in the videos to answer and to be able to clarify later in class, but it also started to help me to figure out who I could do small group instruction or intervention with. So that is an idea. And definitely, yes, the Cornell notes definitely work here too. All I'm saying is that they needed to know the protocol for when they were watching a video, that it wasn't a passive video watching experience, that they were required to actually, you know, consume the content and internalize it and think about it in an academic way. Now, the question piece was always me asking them to think about doing higher order thinking questions. So they had to do hot questions is what I asked them to think about. And so I would actually give them a copy of this for in their journals. And this is just higher order thinking question starters. So instead of just saying, Ms. Carter, I don't know how to do a question, I'd say, well, why don't you go ahead and grab something in the red box and use that to ask your question. So you will have the slide deck so you can access this exact thing, and then you can redo it if you want to. This is something, again, I used in my classroom to help them with those questions at the end. I also would tell them kind of the basic structure of what I wanted their notes to look like. I, in the end, would always ask them to put a box around their summary, and then the hot question always went underneath the box. So it was very clear for me to be able to see where their notes were, where their notes ended, and then zero in on the summary as I walked around the room to double check. Now, in an online environment like we are, it might be something like every so often I would create maybe a Canvas assignment or a Seesaw assignment where I wanted them to take a picture of their notes and submit that for me to be able to see. It's very easy for you to walk around the room and do a double quick formative check on their notes, and it becomes a little bit more difficult when we're doing online environment. But that would definitely be something I would do on a regular basis so that I could see what they're actually getting in their notes. There's another thought I had in there and I'm gonna lose it. Do I need to address anything, Carrie and Kristen?
We have questions about how this might be applicable for younger students.
Yeah, I still think note-taking doesn't appear in our standards until 3rd grade. So I think when we take a look at how this might approach note-taking in general, I think we're looking 3rd through 12, right? And then obviously their notes are going to look slightly different. Don't forget the power of guided notes. And then also we're going to talk a little bit about Edpuzzle is one where you can take a YouTube video and put it into Edpuzzle and then pop up with like little questions that could be multiple choice or short answer. So if you're not good with guided notes or note taking, then maybe you could do something like Edpuzzle where the video will pause and pop up with a quick question for them to answer. I think if we're thinking even littler than that, I know that question came up in our course this morning about flipped classroom ideas with kinder, pre-K, 1st grade. And I'll work on that. I'll work on trying to put something together specifically for you guys and maybe do that in 2 weeks. If you can give me a little bit of time to reach out to some people, that would be really helpful. And I'll try and get that for you. And then, yes, I see someone mentioning sketch notes. I will say that once I reflected on the whole process, at first I think my first year that we were flipped classroom, not only did we become a STEM school, but we became an iPad, one-to-one iPad school at that time. And our boss, our admin, told us we had to go completely paperless. And so at the time, I had my students doing notes on the computer while they were watching, or on their iPad, while they were watching the video, and that was too difficult. So I think sometimes we have to choose the best tool for the job. You know, if kids like to take notes digitally, then you might need to give them that ability. I definitely found that allowing the students to take notes while they're watching the video, paper, pencil, was ultimately the best way for me to go. So I would recommend that. But at one point I was also telling students that they needed to, I was doing guided notes at one point, and for feasibility wise, the guided notes and the flipped classroom videos were a lot for me, and I started to veer away from the guided notes a little bit. And that's also kind of when I started doing the Edpuzzle version, and my students really liked that. So the guided notes were too much for me at the time, and I just, for my own sanity, had to stop using the guided notes. But if you find that might help with your littles, guided notes might be something that could work as well. So I already kind of mentioned Edpuzzle. So that does those embedded questions. I mentioned guided notes. I think that what I found when I started using Edpuzzle, especially with my students, and I had one class in particular where I had, it was an inclusive class, so I had students from special ed in there. I still use the same videos that I used for everyone else, but when I started using Edpuzzle, I saw more engagement and more accessibility from those students, and I still would require some note taking. Obviously, the notes look different from every class, so you just have to kind of pay attention to what they're able to do, but the Edpuzzle really ended up becoming a great tool for some of my classes. The other thing to think about when we're thinking in terms of making videos is simply thinking about your audio. I talk really loud, and so I had to really start to adjust how I was getting my audio. But honestly, I'm using right now just your good old-fashioned earbuds that have the built-in microphone. This still is one of the best ways to grab your audio. I have totally invested, and in fact, I could probably pull it out right now. I've invested in fancy microphones, but honestly, this is the end-all be-all for me and how I end up getting most of my audio for video. There are times where I will sometimes make a video, and this happened, in fact, 2 days ago. I recorded a video. I spent like 20 minutes trying to get the video ready to go, and my audio wasn't on it at all. So I had to go into iMovie and do an audio re-record. But again, I just use this to make that work. So if you have access to earbuds, you can get the fancy ones, I guess, that have like the drop down microphone and stuff. It's really not needed. And in fact, when I went to Apple Academy, this is what they told us to use there too. So, I mean, if you have access to just simple earbuds that have a built-in microphone, use that. Like I said before, I think the most time-consuming part is figuring out and building the content, but then stick with what you're comfortable. So if you are comfortable in Seesaw, use Seesaw. If you are comfortable in Zoom, use Zoom. If you're ready to step up the game and start to do more features, then maybe you're starting to look at QuickTime on your Chromebook. Some things to think about in terms of Screencastify and Screencast-O-Matic. Those are the two options that we referenced earlier to take the place of Loom. Screencastify is a Chromebook extension or Chrome extension, whereas Screencast-O-Matic, you would have to go to the website, and it actually does ask you to download something in order to start recording. So it's a little bit more robust of a program. Neither of them really have a ton of editing features, but I think that that's fine as you first get started. But there's some differences, and again, we'll talk about that in some of my other PD because I'm kind of running out of time here. In terms of document cameras, I think, don't forget that many of us have a phone that has a pretty good camera on it in and of itself. I probably, if I were needing a document camera, I would use my iPad. And quick little note, and I'll probably go over this. This might be more of an intermediate thing, but if you have your charging cord, I'm sorry, I'm just reaching for a charging cord because I know I have one right here. If you have your charging cord, you can actually attach your teacher iPad to your laptop and record using QuickTime everything that you're doing on your iPad. You can also do it from your iPad too, but sometimes when I do it straight from my iPad, the noise I'm making when I'm touching my iPad gets picked up too much. So we will go over how you could potentially use your iPad to make a video if you feel more comfortable with that. And that is really good for our math, our science, and if we're annotating maybe an article or something, use of our teacher iPad. Now, if you're sitting there going, wow, a teacher iPad would be really great. We're working on that for you guys. But I think if you are interested in that route, definitely reach out to your admin because we've got carts of iPads that might be sitting at buildings not being used when we're not on campus that could be potentially turned into a teacher device if you feel like that could work for you. A couple of other options if you are thinking about using a teacher iPad. Again, you can record directly in Seesaw. I think especially if you're going to be doing any kind of handwriting type things or activities, handwriting and using your trackpad on your computer is much more difficult than if you were using your finger on an iPad or if you got a stylus of some sort. A couple of other options too. TouchCast is free. Explain Everything is not free, but it is a good option if you're wanting to do some really kind of more Khan Academy-like videos. And then Adobe Spark Video is a great option for recording videos. And basically what you would do is you'd build all of your content in Adobe Spark Video. and then you would record your voice for each slide in Adobe Spark Video. Very easy to get started. We can teach students how to do it in 5 minutes. So I'm sure you could figure that out really quickly and easily. You are limited to how much you can put on a slide, both text and your recording of your voice, kind of like what we talked about with the Seesaw option. Very much similar, the slide, 20 slides in 5 minutes. I think Adobe, they might not limit you in the number of slides, but I think you're limited to like 5 minutes or something for the audio. Someone can tell me if I'm wrong on that. Screencastify is not something that we have purchased. So Screencastify, to use the extension, you would be using their free version, which would limit you to 5 minutes or less for their video. Okay. So again, lots of options out there. You'd be asking yourself, what am I creating? What is the best use for me? What are some of my limitations? I think to ask for something like Screencastify when you have access to QuickTime on your teacher iPad, and we're in a budget crunch right now, I would say use QuickTime, honestly. QuickTime's my go-to, and I make videos all the time. So something to think about. And especially, again, if you're saying, okay, well, I want to do a screen share and I want to record my face at the same time, you can use Zoom for that. So we've got options in terms of what we have available instead of going out and paying for more things, for sure. Okay. How are we sharing with students? We definitely are going to say, and I just heard from IT earlier today, about an hour ago, we want you to go ahead and upload to your YouTube account. Again, once you upload, you can label it as unlisted. If you have littles, then you're probably going to want to take one more step, and that would be to take your video and put it into a slide deck, and the slide deck is what you would share to Seesaw. However, if you are in Canvas, for example, if you upload the URL for the video from YouTube into Canvas, it automatically embeds into whatever you're doing in Canvas, and you don't have to worry about the students being able to access other things. It cuts all of that out. So there's some things to think about, and we'll definitely be talking about that in the basic video making class for sure. That's at the end of what we're doing. Okay. If students aren't allowed on YouTube by the family, will they still be able to watch the videos? So that's what I'm saying. If you have a community where you know that could potentially be a problem, if you're embedding the videos straight into like a Google slide deck or a Google form, and then that's what you're sharing, they should be fine, because we won't be forcing them out into YouTube. Okay, what other questions do I need to address, guys? Videos to YouTube. So you can definitely go in and create videos straight in Seesaw if that is what works for you. I'm saying if you're using an outside program beyond being directly within Zoom, and you're creating maybe a longer video or something, you have to get that video file to them in some capacity. Video files are very, very large. You can't email video files. You can't just put a video file straight up into Seesaw. They won't allow it. It's too big of a file. So you're going to have to put it somewhere. Carrie noticed last year, as she was making all of those wonderful videos for 4th and 5th grade, she was putting them up on Google Drive, and then we'd hit a capacity in Google Drive, and then we weren't able to access them anymore. And so that is something we'd like to avoid for you guys moving forward. So you don't hit those limits, those video view capacities in YouTube, and you all have a YouTube account. So that would be one of the reasons why we're kind of pushing you into that. And that's kind of what IT is saying to us as well. And yes, you get closed captions on YouTube. And like I said before too, you get the ability to speed up and slow down, which, if we're thinking in terms of equity and accessibility, those are really good functionalities for our students to have access to. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. If we haven't already shared with you, please let us know what you would think would be most helpful in the next couple of weeks. If what I just previewed for the basic, intermediate, and advanced video making doesn't work for you and you'd like something more specific, please let us know. Fill out that survey. I know it seems annoying. We always ask for surveys, but it's really hard for us to know exactly what it is that you're meeting unless you tell us. So I will be going through the chat and mining, answering as many of the questions. Don't forget we have that Q&A doc so that you can go through. You have access to the video. Obviously I'll edit it and put it up and make it available so you can come back and watch it. You have access to the slide deck. And then if I need to change up the video courses coming up, I will, based on your feedback. And don't forget, if you'd like to get PD credit for attending today, thank you so much for coming. I know I went a little bit over time. Instead of 30 to 45 minutes, I'm almost in an hour. But don't forget to do the self check-in, please, as well, so you get that PD credit.